Hello, hello. Welcome to episode 101 of the Titanforge podcast. I'm Dratnos, joined by Tettles.
Hello, Dratnos. I see that you did not, in fact, get our graphics that I put in the Google Drive.
In
for
fact,
this
I did
week.
not, yes.
I see that you're using some from 2 weeks ago, but
Yes, I am. Absolutely. And that's an Easter egg relating to anybody who hasn't watched our show a lot won't get this, but I'm in fact quite bad at stuff, so that's a clever little Easter egg hidden there for...
don't worry. I many weeks just reused some old graphics. If you would have known, the graphics were from Freehold from years ago. It was like episode 11 or some shit that I just took it from.
Yeah, dude, sometimes we're about to record like episode, 98 or whatever, and I just go into the folder and there's like, oh, episode 37 overlays. Tells just re-uploaded them for me to download. But this time I didn't even go there at all because I forgot.
Well, we are 100 episodes in. We got to reuse some content, right?
Yes.
Wait a second.
Alright, so speaking of content, this week we are going to talk about, we got some dungeon and raid tuning to talk about, we got the MDI coming up, and we want to talk a little bit about just dungeons in general, this expansion, compared to last expansion, compared to what we'd like to see in next expansion, which next expansion could be soon. They could be getting us out of Shadowlands, no 9.2. That's what I keep hearing. Or it could be 4 years. I've also heard we're going to be in Shadowlands for 4 years. So there's no way to know when the next expansion could be. Could be any time.
4 years? I hope not.
It's any time from the next 6 months to 4 years is when the next expansion is going to come out, from my understanding.
That is reasonable. However, if we're in this patch for more than a year, I think we will all explode.
Yes. I will end it. I will end it all.
This patch is it's because there's some good stuff going on with it. One exciting thing is they fixed the comp stomp bug that made it so we didn't have comp stomp for the past year or so, roughly. For those who don't know, comp stomp is the currently active PvP brawl. You get to go into Arathi Basin with 14 of your favorite people or, pugs or whatever, and you get to just destroy some computers at a video game, which is a delight. It's very similar to when, you queue up in regular PvP as well if you're on my team, but for other people, this is a new experience of just completely running over people in Battlegrounds.
This is so messed up that they didn't have it working for so long.
Yeah, it's just a shame there's not like a Blood of the Enemy to grind in Comp Stomp Week this time.
Dude, I had your stream turned on the other day and somebody mentioned that it was Comp Stomp and you're like, God, I miss it so much. You're like, I want to grind Blood of the Enemy right now.
That's what they should just put one Stygian Ember from every Comp Stomp you do.
Janice is gonna be so yoked on Stygian Embers. For those who don't know the lore about it, this man grinded Blood of the Enemy 12 hours a day for a full week. On how many characters did you do it on?
I ended up having Blood of the Enemy on 7 characters, but some of them I'd already gotten 1 or 2 of them from actual PvP.
Holy fuck, man.
That's so ridiculous. I remember doing it one time and I was just like, never again.
Yeah, I remember doing it one time being like, this is the worst. And then I remember Comp Stomp rolling around and being like, well, if I do it all this week, I don't have to PvP for it.
You streamed so many hours that week of just Comp Stomp.
It was so fun and cool. Speaking of things that are fun and cool, this week's M+ affixes are also another new pieces of ground being broken. I guess rebroken, because this affix combo did exist back in Legion. Raging and Fortified together on the same keystone has been basically banned since Legion because it is so brutal, especially if you're unprepared for it. But this patch around, they've kind of come in with the goal, I think, of rebalancing Fortified and Tyrannical, making it so that, because what they kind of did is there were several affixes bolstering Raging, Necrotic, that they kind of just shunted over to all or mostly Tyran weeks, and that led to Tyran weeks being a lot worse than the Fort weeks, in addition to Tyran being a little bit worse by default. And so now they've kind of reshuffled that back around. We got Raging back here with Fortified, which is very, very scary in some dungeons this week. There are several dungeons I would not step into without a soothe this week.
It's Raging, Explosive, Fortified, which whenever you hear that, you're like, oh, these affixes don't really slow down your timer a lot. This is probably a decent push week. But then you zone into the keys, and it's not the tank damage that catches you off guard. Like, no tank is ever going to face tank a full pack of enraged mobs. It's the mobs that would do like shoots or bolts on random party members or Shard of Halkias or Shadow of Zul from Spires of Ascension Klotos. And it's those mobs, and you're like, oh my fucking god, I'm dying. And you have to have an enraged for probably 5 out of the 8 dungeons, maybe 4 if you can get away with it. It just kind of depends. It's like Theater Pain is mandatory soothe, Halls of Atonement is mandatory soothe, Spires of Ascension is mandatory soothe, Sanguine Depths is mandatory soothe, Miss, you don't need it, Necrotic Wake, you don't need it, DOS, doing the mask without a soothe is okay.
It's sketch, but you can do it. Yeah, you just gotta not have it casting during its raging window.
What's the dungeon that I'm missing?
Did you say Spires?
Yeah.
He did, yeah. Necrotic Wake, did you say?
Yeah.
Plaguefall, did you say?
No. You don't need one for Plaguefall. So 4 of the dungeons you need to save for. Plaguefall is so hard too because you have Wretched Plague Borers that are enraged, which are normally like very hard on raging, but then you have just like Explosive is notoriously difficult in that dungeon because of the Devoted ads and the slimes, and then you just have a bunch of other shit that does just group-wide damage that catches you off guard. It's insane how much group-wide damage that you get on raging plus fortified. I don't know. You see a lot of high keys done this week, but at the same time, they're not that easy.
Yeah, I don't know. I do think it's not a time loss, right? So if you learn which and how to coordinate the sues on each pack, it's not that bad. Like if you have 2 sues in the group, you're probably good for all these dungeons, honestly. If you just have some really good coordination with it, it might take a run or 2 to get into it, but it's playable and it's not mandatory time loss like bolstering or necrotic.
That's the biggest thing, is that there's like a massive disparity between affixes that are huge time losses and affixes that are just like inconvenience and they make the dungeon harder.
Yeah,
and
that's
like,
the thing. Is, no matter how hard the affixes are, if they are not slowing down ones, which this week isn't, people will push high keys on it, right? And we have seen some fairly high keys being pushed this week.
I mean, it's even like Sanguine. Sanguine is,
yeah,
while it is hard to execute from time to time, it's not a slowy down affix. You can outplay
right.
it.
Whereas bolstering is like, there is no way to do a bolstering key where you don't lose time bolstering, right? You either lose a lot of time because you play it bad, or you minimize your time loss by playing around it, but playing around it still costs time.
Exactly. And same with like Necrotic, where the tank has to kite so aggressively that he's losing his damage and potentially even spreading the pack more than it would like normally happen on a regular week, and that slows you down a lot as well. So
yeah, exactly.
Looking at this week though, we do have two, I guess 3 25s and a 26 timed on this week's affixes,
yeah,
by 3 different groups as well. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, let's compare that to just the overall. So like what we had, our actual best key of the season currently is still a Tyran key from, but I mean, the thing is, early in the season, every week is going to be putting up the best keys because you're geared every week.
Exactly. And on top of that, that Plaguefall that's done is done with an Arcane Mage and a Shadow Priest, which, all things considered, that's not necessarily a bad comp, although that is not...
I mean, they're kind of owning, and I guess they're owning in Necrotic Wake and Plaguefall, which are...
There is no...
Oh, no, they got Sanguine and Halls as well.
There's no world where the best 3 DPS involve a Shadow Priest and an Arcane Mage.
What? Dude.
Well, Shadow is good with fire, specifically.
Shadow's
right?
good with Arcane too. It's
not in the
bad.
same way. I mean, I think we're going to end up seeing like very high keys done this season.
Yeah, we will have to see how it works out.
Sure.
I mean, Arcane. The thing is, all 3 mage specs have a lot of like, what's Billy playing? Billy's playing fire. I bet there's Frost on this front page as well. Yep, there's Billy playing Frost in one of these.
Yeah.
Yeah. They all just,
I mean,
do such good stuff.
But the thing is, like, Shadow Priest is good utility, but it's not great utility for an Arcane Mage, right?
Yeah, there's a little bit less, but still, I think it's a fun combo.
It's also a fairly low utility comp that they're running, which is...
Yeah, you got, they have a Subrog,
That's
I guess.
true.
It's not,
That's a big
yeah.
It's
Arcane Mage really doesn't
Subrog,
do much for utility.
exactly. Subrog, Arcane Mage, Shadow Priest,
Holy Paladin.
Holy Paladin, Bear. You're like, what the fuck is they...
But you don't need utility on pulls where your bear is incarning, right? Your bear's never gonna die. You don't need to like kick all the stuff other tanks need kicked.
True.
You just
but
like,
anyways,
whatever. Cast on me.
that's that's probably not going to be the best comp towards the end of the season. I think we'll see the meta flesh out a little bit more, but at the same time, 26 Plaguefall done on Tyran, very impressive. That's a lot of
Danger.
Margaret Dama casts.
Yeah.
Big danger.
All right. Let's move on to talking about the dungeon and raid tuning. Here are the hotfixes that went live this week. Painsmith Raznal first among them. A gap now appears in every row of spikes during stage 2 on mythic difficulty. Huge nerf to that part of the fight. That was the hard part of the intermission was that wall of spikes that had no gap in it, and now there's just a gap right in the middle as well. So it's perfectly positioned for that part of the fight. And my guild combined with the other guild that's killed Sylvanas on our server this week, because both of us had some people that wanted to raid and some that didn't, and we one-shot Painsmith in that Intart Corn Pop run.
Intart Corn Pop.
Yeah, it's Incarnate Pop-Tart Corn Dog. They're the powerful mashup. Yeah, so, I mean, the boss is extremely nerfed right now. Not just from that, but also 10% health nerfs to the boss, the spiked balls, and the intermission ads, which, I mean, there are many progression wipes are related to, balls or horrors barely not dying as well, and that is definitely going to reduce that. Now, if you're a guild that hasn't finished progressing on this boss, there's still hard stuff to learn about the fight, but it is hugely nerfed, and if you're in a spot where you were close to killing it or you have already killed it, you will never struggle with this boss again. It has been, yeah.
It's so stupid that you still have to stop DPS on this fight, because not even for offensive CDs, because the boss health got nerfed, you're waiting for your healing cooldowns because of the and stuff.
Dude, in our run, we just YOLO'd it.
Did you actually just yell? You didn't wait for.
You didn't stop at all.
We just went full YOLO.
Because
that's awesome.
A lot of the healing cooldowns are based around the 3-minute timer. You have shit like Trank, Barrier,
Yeah.
Aura Mastery, Spirit Link.
We just didn't use any healing cooldowns in phase 1, and that meant they were all off cooldown.
How many hammers did you skip? 2?
I don't know. We just attack boss, man. You just hit it until it goes up for intermission. But you're right. Okay,
you skip a set of mines.
You have a good point about it, which is you should be probably still topping DPS on progression on this boss. Yeah, it still makes the fight a lot easier to wait until the enrage is coming in and then push, because as you're saying, you do get the same defensives in the same spot in every phase, and that's really valuable. But you definitely don't need to. If you've killed the boss pre-nerf, you do not need to stop DPS post-nerf, I promise.
That is going to make it super nice for reclears. But yeah, like Darnus was saying, if you have someone dead on progression, stopping for DPS and defensive CDs is really good, because also when the ads spawn, you have more and more CDs available to cleave off.
Yeah, well, and you want to 3-minute both sets of Shadow Steel horrors ideally as well in a lot of cases, which means the only way you can do that is if you delay until the last hammer cast of phase 2 before pushing into the intermission. Otherwise, it won't be up. So all in all, it's a big nerf to this boss. However, I actually don't mind seeing bosses nerfed in this way. To some extent, it's a little sad, right? You had a boss that was really, really difficult and fun and challenging. On the other hand, progression on that boss is over for all three of us at this point, right? And now the guilds that are reaching that boss now, that will be reaching it next reset, I think for those guilds, a lot of them having to deal with a wall of spikes with no gap in it, I feel like it would be pretty rough. I mean, I imagine you're just a Kyrian dwarf shaman, you're like, oh, I'd like to raid or whatever. It's just what am I supposed to do? Help. And even just the people that are supposed to jump off and goblin jump back on or whatever, that's hard. That's not easy. So
there's some parts of the room that don't work as well with that ability. It's really finicky.
You can get hit off the edge. Left. Yeah.
You literally cannot goblin jump around the left side. You always have to goblin jump around the right side. And if your spike opening is on the left side and they have to cross the room all the way to the right side, then it's sketchy whether or not they're going to make it there in time.
I will do my tip of the week right now, though, because it is very relevant for this, though. My tip of the week is you can life grip over that as well. So if you need to, if you're caught out, Life Grip and Gateway are both valid ways to cross a spike wall without getting hit. So potent.
Huh.
Potent little thing there.
I know you
The
got
thing about
Life
the
Grip.
Gateway is usually you use the Gateway at the end of the phase to all Gateway and then be in the same spot and spawn all your ads right stacked on each other. But honestly, it's not that bad for 1 or 2 people to Gateway if they're in trouble and then just run to that spot and make sure that they're spawning an ad there. Better than
Another
wiping.
external way is to get bopped from a paladin if you don't have a way
True.
to get across yourself too.
Yeah, or if you're like Marileth on Necrolord, you can just flesh it as well. Flesh it with a DR, and yeah, you good.
Our DK IBF, he doesn't use Marilith. He just IBF fleshcrafts it and lives.
Oh yeah, IBF works. The stun immune from IBF or from Marilith, they're both pretty important, pretty helpful.
Our Holy Paladin just gets sacked and pops his wall, and he just lives it too.
That ends. All right. The next thing on the hotfix list that we had coming in this week is a huge set of M+ nerfs. The Spirit in DOS rages for 5 seconds instead of 6.
Good shit.
Yeah.
It seems really small, but I think that's kind of a big change because
The last tick
usually
was what
people
killed
will
you.
die to the very last tick. Yeah. And so this is one less tick, I'm sure, from the cast, which would be nice.
Halls
Yeah.
of Atonement, 1 extra minute on the timer. This was actually a fairly tight timer dungeon. It was weird though, because like, if it's a dungeon where you're like, oh, this is kind of a nice easy one, right? A nice chill halls. But then you look at the timer and you're like, oh my god, if we wipe once, we are out of this.
This dungeon was very polarizing in that regard, as to whether or not you had a Guardian Druid who would aggressively pull the key versus not. So the first pull of the dungeon, whenever you're running with a Bear Druid, is 30% of the instance. You run all the way up the right side and pull everything into the shard like it's a fucking MDI pull. And if you don't have a Guardian Druid, you're struggling to time the key.
Yeah, it's like 4 pulls if you're done have a Guardian.
I also think
As-
it's really hard to gauge timers this patch, and I think that timers have also been like very easy for this patch as a whole because the top end groups are just playing double debuff with the final boss, so their timers are really free. But the timers aren't set up to be like the timers aren't set up for you to play double debuff with it. So most timers in most dungeons are really lenient.
I was gonna say on that first pull, if you're not a Guardian Druid, what I've been doing is Brewmaster's stealthing around most of the beginning trash
I pull it back.
pulling like half of the Guardian Druid pull into the shard. So
Oh, that's so unlucky.
so you still lust it at least, and you get your CDs going, but it's not quite as big as a Guardian pull.
The
30%.
Echelon Leap is also been nerfed here by 15%, which this is just the the damage when you get hit by this thing. So I guess that's nice. I don't know what level this is a one-shot currently, but you do want to avoid getting hit by this still.
I don't think it's like ever really a one shot.
I guess the dot is what gets you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. I'm always not a fan of when they nerf the
avoidable
avoidable
stuff?
abilities, whereas the unavoidable abilities are like trucking and need nerfs sometimes.
Yeah,
like
this
it
one
buffs
is
the
like-
obliterators in halls.
You do need a curse dispel to be able to dodge this one, right? I guess like I don't really mind this sort of nerf because it's still scary. Like 15%, it's still a scary thing that you're gonna want to dodge.
That's true. If you don't have a curse to spell, then yeah, that's reasonable.
Mists an extra 5 or 3 seconds on Droman's Wrath, and they also changed some spell queuing after this on the boss so that it won't cast fear below 25% or something, which is nice. It means you're not getting feared into the burn unless you were pushing really fast.
Oh, I
This,
didn't know they did that. That's big.
Yeah.
Yeah. This keys timer was actually pretty tight, just as a whole. But it's tight because last season the timer was balanced around you having Prideful and 1 facing the first boss, and now you're spending approximately 4 more minutes on the first boss than you did last season.
Yeah.
Hopefully that'll let you have 1 less phase though, with the 3 additional seconds on that stun.
Plague Belchers summoned slimy morsels. So that's the big abominations summoning their little friends that cast or whatever that you either run on top of or stun or whatever. 50% less health. And the slimy morsels.
that's-
Oh wait, no. Okay, so Plague Belchers are the.
No, this is
This is
the
the
that's
big
the ones
giants.
that run into the.
Okay, yeah.
It's the fat boy and his little slimelings.
Yeah, and then the boss. Okay, so this is first boss room ads and boss.
Yeah.
Their morsels 50% less health for the trash ones, and 30% for the boss ones. I see. I misread this at first then. Cool. I guess I don't really like the strategy. I wonder if it still will be CC them, but it does make not CCing them a little bit less punishing.
The smorgasbord didn't get hit, so you always CC the smorgasbord.
I think that's good. So they've kind of designed it now so you CC the one big ad and you can kill the little ones.
The issue is you never want to kill those small ads. You'd rather just CC them every single time because it's one person dropping a CC versus you committing like tangible damage resources.
Yeah, not all groups have like a good way to long-term CC 3 mobs though, right? Like Mass Entangle or Binding Shot into like Ring of Frost or whatever. Like those abilities are really good for this part,
Basically
but not all
just
groups
Mass
have them.
Entangle.
Yeah, Mass Entangle is best for sure. Sangy D. Gluttonous Ticks now lose stacks of Engorge when they leave combat, so if you're wiping to Gluttonous Ticks, it is a little bit less punishing.
Yeah, yes, that is the only reason that ever happens.
I have never had a Gluttonous Tick leave combat with a stack of Engorge, though, in a key that I've timed, I don't think. I think it's already kind of over when that
one's
set of
like,
events
okay,
has happened.
right.
And they nerfed Juggernaut Rush on Crixus, which I think is a really good nerf, because that was really hurty.
Yes, definitely. That fight has way too many AoE party hits as it is. Like,
yeah, the
that
difference
almost
between
one-shot the
like
group back to back.
Juggernaut Rush targeting a mage with Ice Block versus a Windwalker or whatever, you're just like, oh, this is much worse. Everybody's gonna take so much damn. But then if somebody gets it, they can block there. You're just like, okay, we're good. Stitch
Thanks,
Flesh,
RNG.
10% health reduction in Necrotic Wake. Poggers.
Another good one.
Yeah, that boss, very frustrating when it goes back up at 5% health as well.
Yeah, that boss went from a kill it in the 1 phase with Pride to kill it in 2 phases this season. So maybe that'll bring it back to 1, maybe 1.5 phases.
I think
The
it's
scary
still
thing-
2 probably, yeah.
The scary thing isn't Surgeon Stitchflesh himself. I mean, although that does mitigate the problem, it's definitely the Abomination ads having just
When they
way
enrage.
too much health.
Yeah.
Exactly. Whenever you have multiple out, you just kind of wipe. But
Yeah.
you don't really want to be committing damage into them, so it's a weird balance. I think that the 10% HP nerf on him is not bad. I think that the A-bomb's health needs to be dropped probably by like 20% as well, though.
And finally, in
Yeah,
top,
I agree.
we have first boss nerfs in top, which
Oh, dude.
These are good.
These are good. It's interesting because like I find the first boss to be the easiest by far of the dungeon. I guess maybe Kulturok is also really easy.
Yeah.
But it can kind of thwack an undergeared tank, which the slam is a big part of that.
Dude, there are a lot of things in Theater of Pain that need nerfs, honestly. The gas bag needs probably its damage and health cut.
Dude, what is that
Nevermore?
tormented spawn point as well? The one in the circle there?
I don't know. It's
Yeah,
so
that
bad.
was annoying.
That one is so toxic.
Who put that there?
Is that one of the rotating lieutenants, or is that always the Frost lieutenant?
It's a rotating one. Yeah. No, sometimes it's
sometimes
the
it's
fireman.
Incinerator, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. When it's
Nevermore-
Frost, you can Skippy, yeah.
Yeah, Advent Nevermore needs a nerf. Zav banner health needs to be cut like in half. I was talking about this the other day. I haven't seen something that needs like a massive 50% nerf in a long time to a dungeon. That was like, pretty common for Legion to have meme shit where you just need like a 50% nerf on something. In this expansion, if they hit the banners on Zav with the 50% nerf, I would not be upset. I'd be like, that is the right health that those things need to have.
True. I think that's kind of comp dependent. Like I was playing with an arcane mage and arms warrior, and those banners would just get deleted every time in like a 23. But
Yeah, it's
The other comps
it's
are
still a
really
commitment of damage as well, right? Those aren't well, I guess the arms warrior is not as much of a commitment because of the old sweepy strikes.
And the Blade
Sweepy
Stormy.
strikes.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree though. I agree that in particular could use a little bit more.
That dungeon is by far the hardest this patch.
Okay, let's
Honestly, I think Hall. Sorry to
Go
derail
ahead.
a little bit. But Halls is a really tough dungeon. They buffed those obliterators. Their tank hit cast is insane.
Wicked
on
Bolt.
On a 23, if the caster is raging, and there's usually multiple casters in the pool, one of their hits will one-shot the tank, most likely. And it's already to that point in this season, so it's gonna be rough on higher level halls.
especially for Brew, right? Brew, like big bursts of magic dam are so scary for Brew, right?
Yeah, I almost want to like make a route that just goes straight to Sagadon and gets the magic reduction, and then does the whole rest of the instance after somehow.
Imagine playing Sagadon. Lol.
Yeah, I know.
You, dude,
It's not worth it.
that I don't know. You always skip the Frost guy and Sagadon every single week.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to tip of the week. I already did my tip of the week. Is about Painsmith, Life Grip, and Gate. Trell, what is your tip of the week?
Ooh, mine has to do with our good old add-on ERT, or AKA MRT now, with method acquiring it. But if you're a tank player and you mark yourself so the group can find you, which is also a tip in itself. But if your mark disappears from your head a lot, either in Raid or Mythic Plus, if you use this add-on ERT, then you can force the mark to stay on you. There's a tab in it called Marks, and you just type your name in the field next to the mark you want, and then you press enable every time you're going to play.
How does that fuck with auto marker?
So if you try to mark something else, it'll immediately snap back onto your character, the mark. So an auto marker weak aura will attempt to mark something else, and then right after that, it'll go back to your character.
But then the mark that the auto marker is trying to mark won't be on there, right?
Yeah, so you need to make sure that you want to just have a no conflict, right? You want to use a free mark.
Yeah.
That the auto marker
so
is
you
trying
can
to use.
disable whichever mark you're using in ERT from your auto marker weak aura.
I think the auto marker one by default has blue disabled, the blue square.
Yeah, that's a good tank one.
I think
that's
that's the one that's disabled by default, but although I'm not 100% sure, you'd have to look at the auto marker weak aura.
Speaking of things we have to look at, let's take a quick look at Tettles' clip of the week. This one is a banger. I've seen this. We'll listen to this one with sound. I think this deserves it.
From the boss. It does 30% more damage each tick than the tooltip.
Really?
I want this to be known that this was like 5 a.m.
I literally watched that happen in slow fucking motion.
Wait, that can't be right? Doesn't it do like infinite damage at the end? Oh, I guess it takes every...
Dude.
Another classic instance of the Tettles effect.
Dude, I've never been hit like that before.
The bounce back of the statue.
I've never even seen that. It's just like I died to it and I was like, oh my god, it hit the other one and just killed me.
Yeah. I love
Defeated by geometry.
Love that.
No.
Okay. Let's move on to talking about the MDI. The MDI is coming up very soon. Time trials are starting next Wednesday, which is pretty hype. They go on for like 6 days, but that's the only time trials this season, unless you want to do the Last Stand tournament, which has its own time trials later. So for those who don't know, the MDI is on a new format this time around.
Yes.
We're doing so the time trials are coming up, right? And then the top 24 teams out of the time trials, which is global region except for China, will be split into 3 groups that each play on their own weekend in the kind of standard, 8-team tournament stuff that you may be used to. Top 2 teams from each of those go on to the global finals. And then we also have a Last Stand tournament that'll have 1 team advance as well, which can be just anybody that didn't queue from that, and a team from China as well. And that will be the global finals. So it should be a pretty hype season. It's a lot more streamlined. It's a lot fewer time trials weekends. But you still get 4, regular season weekends. It's just, they'll all be different from each other, right? They'll either have different teams or there'll be that Last Stand tournament that should be pretty hype. So
I know that you and I haven't like discussed this thoroughly. Did we want to do something for time trial week?
Could do.
Maybe.
We may end up putting up maybe some YouTube coverage or something of
maybe
how
some
time
YouTube
trials
coverage
have been going or something.
Maybe some casting. We'll see.
We'll circle back. Yeah, see if there's something going on
half
there.
asleep 2 a.m. daily recap of the
Oh my god,
current time trial.
dude. Yeah, for those who don't know, what Tettles and I we were doing Race to World First daily update videos on like what was going on, but the only time we could record was 2 a.m. local or something. After after the production was done for the day, and so we were just there like dead recording that thing. One day I was like sick as well, and I was just like a zombie.
He was so
Barely
out of it.
alive.
He was sitting there like this the whole entire time. I look over him like, "Yo, you good?" And he's like, "I was, like,
I was not
"Holy
good."
fuck."
Yeah.
He was not good.
We
Yeah,
made it
right
through
there.
though. That's the show must go on. Anyways, back to the MDI. It should be pretty exciting. I'm pretty hyped for this format. I'm also pretty hyped for the teams that are competing. We got a lot of kind of new blood or returning blood from the signups I've seen so far. Don't want to spoil it too much, but I think there's a good shot that we will have some exciting competition going on with this one. There's kind of
Name them.
4 like categories of teams, right? There's the MDI's teams from last season, which most of those I think are going to play again. Although Echo now isn't playing this season, so they will have to settle for the other world first tank, Mira's, who's also on their team, being their tank. Yeah, it's so tough out there
Tragedy.
when you're on Echo, you know. And then other than that, you got all those other top teams. I think like Perplexed, Bay Alliance, Golden Guardians. I think all shown back up, and you will also see some great push teams. I'm pretty sure making their way into the MDI, and there are some new teams of like raiding guilds. You know, the team just signing up as 5 players from a top-ish raiding guild. I've seen a couple of those when I've been perusing the teams list. And there are even some teams of some people that like last played in MDI in Shadow or in BFA Season 2 or in Legion Season 3 or something. So
Like who?
I'm not spoiling anything, Tettles. If you want, you can go through the 12 pages of teams yourself.
Leak them right now.
I'm not leaking.
Leak 'em.
Dratnos is clearly making a YouTube video about this, and he's just trying to save
I'm not,
the
dude. I'm
information
just
for
hyped.
himself.
I'm just I'm hyped for to see some teams play. But mostly it'll be exciting as well because we won't see them all play against each other until the finals, right? Like the best team from Group A, the best team from Group B. It'll be hard to know who's better. Although I think smart money remains on Echo as always.
Or perplexed.
You get Perplexed very
I
strong.
think the Echo's going to lose a lot of strong performance from losing now, though. That's a group that's had 4 or 5 people that have done so many MDIs in the past, and now they're losing like one of their very core members.
I think they won
For
the
at
cup
least
weekend
this-
where Zalia was out though. Like they had Zalia out and Jethan for a weekend, and they won that weekend.
Yeah, which is really, really impressive, by the way.
Right. That's the thing is like now is super sick. Zalia is super sick, but the other 4 members of the team and whoever they get in as a 5th is also so sick. And yeah, like it's not like Mira's is going to be bad on tank either.
Yeah, but moving, I would say that the healer role just as a whole is less impactful for an MDI style thing than you would realistically expect. Not that Zalia is bad by any means. Like all of those players are incredibly good, and it takes a bunch of moving parts to make a team as successful as they are. But it is like for MDI, the healer more or less is just like a support DPS role.
The tank does have some like the most proactive job in the party, right? Which is is the kind of thing that makes it harder to replace them. But if I had to pick one person to like, if I could have anybody in the world audible into my team as a tank last minute, first it would probably be now, but second it would probably be Miraz, right? That's
And Miraz has
Yeah.
bounced back and forth between tank and DPS quite a bit too, so he's very versed, and he has tons of MDIs on his belt.
yeah. So I mean, I'm excited because I do like that there's a shakeup in the team. It means that there will be some excitement about the whole thing. But I'm still my money's still on Echo, and I think now is coming back the season after or something. We'll see though. Of course, up in the air. He was gonna play the New World, but then they delayed that. So now he's playing like Final Fantasy instead for a bit, just taking a little bit of a break.
Yeah, he's actually doing that with Max and a bunch of other
Yeah,
mashups of WoW players, right?
there's some like some WoW people, some just like other gamers. They're doing like a Final Fantasy raids without knowing the strats in advance. Does look kind of cool, kind of fun. I hope they have a good time. I think that's there's this dude. This is a bit of a tangent, but man, the reaction people have to like WoW streamers going and streaming another game. I feel like it's so like I don't know, jealous. I think this comes from like how people themselves feel when they play a game other than WoW, where it's like, oh god, I should be playing WoW. Oh god, oh my Oh, my Corthia today. I didn't do my Corthia today. Oh no, you guys. I missed my Torghast this week because I was playing another game. So they kind of like extrapolate that into how they react when their WoW streamers are playing games other than WoW. But man, I've never seen it with other games as much.
Yeah, there's been quite the outcry on Twitter, that's for sure.
Is it just with WoW, or is it with anybody who has like an audience made up of one main game?
It might be that. Yeah, I could be exaggerating.
Or maybe it's just MMO tribalism, as Max would say.
I feel like WoW in particular has just like this, like WoW as a game so wants to be the only game you play, and I feel like people then kind of make that be the only. They want it to be the only game that their streamers play as well, right? I don't know.
Even within the game, it's like a sub-tribalized where people don't like it when others play different types of content within that same game. Like, oh, filthy PvPers. Oh,
Holy
crazy,
shit.
crazy Mythic Plusers.
I miss when you played Brew. Oh, I miss Prot Warrior Trell. I miss Vengeance Trell. Yeah.
Oh God, that
Holy
rogue.
crap, yeah.
Dratnus, when are you playing rogue again?
Well, yeah.
I only watch you for your rogue content.
Where's
Dratnus. When are
Petals,
you going
man?
back to
Where's
rogue?
I miss Petals.
Nobody says this. Nobody says that. Don't worry.
Did you switch mains?
Did you quit WoW? Did you switch mains?
Did you quit WoW, dude?
Yeah.
Whenever I was playing TFT for a while, people kept asking me that. I'm like, no, I didn't quit WoW. Stop.
All right. So anybody want to make any predictions for MDI about like meta, perhaps? A real quick look at like, I don't know, tank meta.
I think Prot Warriors are really good.
I
also-
agree. I think
I also
Bear-
do think it's Prot Warrior or Vengeance. I actually don't think it's Bear.
So I think that the
I
question
don't
is
think
the
it's Bear
keystone
most
level.
of the time either.
Yeah.
I don't think Bear does enough damage.
I think
You're
you
gonna do,
bear like halls if it's like 22 or higher or something. That's the question. Is like what is the key level going to be for this as well?
You
no
bear
idea.
any necrotic key.
Probably.
Yeah, necrotic. I mean, I actually thought that in the first MDI, this expansion, but all the teams played DH even on necrotic, even though they knew about the UFR legendary interaction with it and halls. They still played DH because it was more damage.
Yeah, maybe that's true.
But,
Maybe it's a case of like you always end up playing the higher damage things. So you always find your way to Vengeance or Prot. What about Prot Paladin? Do you think you can ever just drop the Hallow and smash the dam?
I do think we're going to see some prop pally if they can find a way to live. I think that's something we would see like Divine Field or Now do if Now is playing.
Holy shit, Divine.
I don't know.
Prot Paladin.
Yeah, I don't,
God, that's
maybe
throwback.
Dorky too. I've seen him playing his pally.
Yeah.
But
Amino?
there's a chance for like maybe even 5 out of the 6 tanks to be somewhere in the MDI. Honestly, they're all pretty good in their own way right now.
Healers, on the other hand, we did talk a little bit about MDI meta predictions where we talked to Dorky, but healers, I'm fairly confident in the pink class being the MDI one.
Vesper Totem Resto Shaman, man.
True, Vesper Totem, that is good.
That does. There are shamans that are doing like 6 to 7k DPS right now with Vesper Totem.
Okay, yeah. And then damage dealers. This is the biggest question. The biggest open question is like, what spec is the mage going to play? What are the other 2 DPS going to be? Do you ever not play a mage? These are the mysteries. Do we know, is the spec, is it still class restricted or is it spec restricted?
It's class restricted now.
Is it so that's the same as it was last season?
Or
It's
it's
spec
spec
restricted
restricted
now?
now. Yeah, it's
Okay.
the one that's not as bad anymore.
So that means that
changed to be better.
we could just see the Trinity mage group.
Oh,
Could you
fuck,
imagine?
dude.
You zone in as 3 blue classes, 1 of each spec.
I'd bald.
It would be so.
I'd be
Dude, could you
so
imagine
mad.
a full house, blues over pinks, right? Just,
Do you think it's going to be a bunch of fire mages again? I think so.
I
Really?
have a good feeling about fire as well. Yeah, as the most common mage spec. But I bet we will see all 3 over this MDI season.
How do you feel
Oh.
about AF Warlock in an MDI?
Yeah.
Well, they're kind of limited to 1 minute CDs, right? I don't
No,
know. It might be a little
they
too
just-
long for MDI.
They just pipe all the time though with that legendary.
They're sustained AoE. Their niche is actually sustained AoE, but they do like 5k DPS single target or something just absurd.
Yeah, absurd
Well,
like that.
how do they?
Yeah.
I think the problem with Warlock is how do they measure up against something like Shadow Priest that can kind of do the same thing, but also provide PI to the group, which is insanely good when you like if you
I'll be
introduce PI in an
PI
MDI
myself.
environment, then it's just like way above the other team that didn't.
Is it legal for you to PI somebody else this patch?
Dude, we had
That's a
to
Shadow Priest.
we had to get a Shadow Priest to like PI a Moonkin or something during Sylve, and ooh, it was hard. It was really tough. We had to like it was like going through the 5 stages of grief about losing his PI, and it was a tough bit.
Damn, that's so messed up. How
It
could
was
you do
really
that to
messed up.
Ronnie?
Yeah.
So messed up, bro.
Random tangent, but you know how much my guild has argued about who is getting PI on Sylvanas? That is a fight where PI is not clear who to give
Yeah.
it to.
We get you like everybody gets a PI in different parts of the fight. Like we get a PI on a fire mage at one point to get cooldown reduction. We get a PI on a demo lock at one point. Our DK getting his PI during his army. It's
Yeah, the chickens taking their PIs.
I'm not.
You're not taking
I'm
a PI?
getting one. I'm not
I guess-
taking one now.
Yeah, in most guilds, all player skill being equal, you'd want to PI some Moonkins, but I understand in your guild, you probably want to not do that.
So fucked up that you treat me like this.
All right, let's move on to our next topic here, which is things we'd like to see different in Dungeons X expansions. This was a little bit inspired by a YouTube series that you can find over at youtube.com/Tettles. I assume that links to your channel. I actually don't know for sure.
Probably, I think so.
Okay, well,
There-
search
there was
Tettles on
also-
YouTube.
There was also a great one that I watched as well while doing this, which was Dratnus' Dream Mythic Plus expansion. Do you remember doing that?
That was a method
That
video.
was a method
right?
video. Yeah.
Yeah.
I watched that to try to see what you said back then.
Yeah. But the M Plus Historian series that Tettles has been doing is basically he like picks like a Legion dungeon and then just like pines for the good old days for 20 minutes.
Realized why the dungeon sucked so
Sure.
bad.
Sits back in his armchair and realizes he's old just like me, and
There was a
reminisces
comment
about the
In
the
the Eye of
glory days of
Azura
me.
video, where it's just like every single poll, Tettles is like, yeah, this poll actually kind of sucked. And then at the end of the dungeon, it's like, yeah, it's a good dungeon.
That checks out. Well, the reason the dungeon was good is because the trash was like really fun to play, but the dungeon did kind of suck. And I love. Okay, one of our I'm gonna just completely ruin this meme, but whenever one of our patrons changed his name to something that I said in the video. Oh yes, it was another boss with one shots, but this one you actually save your B reses for. That I was talking about Wrath of Ashara. That line is absurd.
God, I loved Wrath of Azura.
That's
That
true.
was-
You actually had to have P-reses on that fight.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That fight was actually so good.
But I actually feel like I learned a lot about going back through those dungeons and reminiscing on like what made them fun, and then also realizing that they were not all that great. There was a
Yeah.
lot of really bad stuff in them.
It's the kind of thing where like if they re-released those dungeons, we would have so many complaints about them.
I'd be so mad. Just like one shot. I'd be like, dude, I'm dead.
Yeah.
This pack is not pullable. No. You remember how people complained about the Atal'Dazar pulls with the
Honor guards.
Oh god, with the honor guards?
Double honor guard. Yeah.
Every single dungeon had those. So you're just like, what the fuck is this?
M Plus just had such a different texture back in Legion as well, because there was the weekly key level, and then like you could push keys like 15 keys higher than that, but to do that you just had to know all of this stuff. There was this huge barrier to entry where it's like the dungeon was so different than it was at the weekly key level, right? Because like 30 different things one shot you throughout the dungeon. You just had to play around all of them.
So-
like you were gear swapping to your Pride as and your Fell Shield emitter or whatever, and that's how you were gonna live Herja or something.
So I think that actually comes down to dungeon layout as well. So every dungeon had, you could get probably 150% count in the dungeons,
That's what I was about to say. There's so
But
much
the-
trash.
but the dungeons were all open enough and not like, basically every dungeon we have this expansion is pretty linear to a point. Halls of Atonement being the most open one, but
Even that,
then,
you have pretty strong incentives to pull a lot of the same trash to get the shards.
exactly. The Legion dungeons were a lot more open by design, but at the same time they would give you probably 250% enemy forces if you cleared the whole entire dungeon. But at the same time, their linear dungeons were pretty bad because you were walking in a straight line, but you would end up at like 130%. But nonetheless, like you said, the texture was a lot different for the time.
Yeah, I don't think there were any like straight up barrier packs like the double honor guard pack though. Like you could basically just walk around anything that was like that in Legion, right? Was there anything you could think of where it was just like you had to fight this and it was impossible, or you death skip?
I think you could skip most bad stuff, but it was like you did some weird stuff to do skips. You remember the Ivajara boat skip that you would do to get up to the third boss?
I
Yeah,
did that
that's
one in the
useful.
video, and I'm just like, God, I still got it.
I would ride a druid up as a monk, put my port up top, jump back down, hop on a traveler mount, put 2 people on my mount, and then port up with them and place them on the cliff. That was awesome.
There were definitely some pulls that were like that. Like the first pull in Darkheart Thicket with the cats was actually impossible until people realized that you could snap the cats onto that little plant.
Yep, sure.
There definitely were some mobs that were off limits, but also in the way. At the same time, though, everything was a little bit different at that point because you had failure detection pylons for skips.
True. I forgot about those.
Which I actually think that those were kind of bad for the game, but
it did mean it did make like double honor guard a little bit less bad to put in your dungeon.
I think that failure detection pylons are good whenever you're using them to skip things in a unique way, but I think they're bad whenever you're substituting them for checkpoints.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Because because somebody died and you're like, oh, wipe it up and we'll pylon and res. I think that is bad. But I do think that
if you could only use them for like disaster recovery, then that'd be so ideal in my mind. Because like imagine in Shrine of the Storm, you wiped at the very end of the dungeon right before you killed the third boss, but someone was able to drop a pylon and saved you a 6-minute run back. That would have been so nice.
Well, that's just an issue of the run back being bad, not necessarily
the
the pylons being good.
That's pylons would be a band-aid there for what they should have done, which is make your checkpoint update in a reasonable fashion.
Yeah, but the pylons are good whenever you're substituting them for like a death
shroud
skip or something. Yeah, exactly. That's when they're good, is like whenever they're being substituted like that. So it's like it's hard to say.
One thing that got added in BFA to dungeons was a trash mechanic that has become a little bit more popular even in Shadowlands than it was in BFA. It's the Fervent Strike mechanic. There wasn't really too much of this back in Legion, but this mechanic's named after Fervent Strike and Taldazar, the honor guards, the living honor guards, not the dead ones. Although the dead honor guards, some of them there was the Rending Claw Fervent on the dead side as well. Mm-hmm. But there was an actual Fervent Strike was the name of this ability, which just it would hit the tank, but if the tank was out of melee range, it would hit the closest person if there was anybody in melee range. So you needed to like get away from them or parry, and it made kiting a little bit of a mess. Trell, what I know you have strong feelings about Fervent Strike. Why don't you take it away?
Strong feelings. So for the brief history of the lingo of Fervent Strikes, they didn't exist at all in Legion. They were added in at the beginning of BFA because of how much kiting there was going on at the top level keys being done at the end of Legion. And people were basically just disabling the trash, and they wouldn't do anything but walk at the tank very slowly. So they added a baseline feature of every mob they created to Fervent Strike. If the tank was ever out of range, if they had a tank hit, they would just automatically hit the nearest DPS instead. And that's their template to this day still. So when they design dungeons, every mob will do that by default until they slowly fix one by one the mobs that shouldn't do that over the course of the expansion. So that's why at the very beginning of Shadowlands, like every single thing was doing it. I think some of them were fixed already. At least
like
through beta and some on live.
The Necropolis of Necrotic Wake, right? A lot of those were fervents.
Yes.
And aren't now,
including
right?
the stitch work. Yes, the stitch works were fervents, which were just troll.
Yeah.
Okay, so what you're saying is that we should have less fervents as a whole in keys, right, Trell?
But yeah, so when they... Well, sorry, I got a lot more to spiel before we talk about it. So the reason they did that was to fix the kiting thing, but they also decreased tank threat at the exact same time by a lot when they went into BFA. And that's been a constant problem at the beginning of every expansion too. So first of all, I think they should make both of those things a smaller deal since they added both solutions at the same time. But especially Fervent Strikes, I think some kiting is good, and kiting can be a high skill thing when you're out of defensives and you need 5 seconds to be out of range of mobs and then go back in. That's great. That's a high skill tank thing. But if you're required to do it and then they also kill your DPS because you had to do it, I hate it.
So what is this trying to solve?
Fervents?
The removal of fervents. Like what exactly does that solve?
Well, I mean, you could remove most of the Fervent Strikes and just keep in the most important solo mobs. Like Sagadon should probably have a Fervent Strike, because he's the only thing you're supposed to be tanking, and taking that hit is like the entire puzzle of the pull. But like in a pull where there's 10 medium-sized mobs and 3 of them are going to kill your DPS the moment you kite, I don't like that. I don't know. Maybe that makes sense.
Because it reduces the amount that you can like do a substantial size pull, right?
I think
True.
that's
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think fervent strikes are actually not a bad tool in the toolkit here, but I think that they should be like, I don't know, much more clearly telegraphed as well, because they are like, I don't know, give them a longer cast time, give them a nice animation, because I feel like fervent strikes have always been this thing where it's just like you die and you don't know how you died, and you're like, man, do you remember like Grease Gun in Motherload?
Yeah,
Just like a fervent that doesn't have a cast time. I think there are some of those in Shadowlands as well, right? I guess there's not anything as bad as Grease Gun, but
The only thing that's like really bad is what was A-bombs at the beginning of Necrotic Wake that do the meat shield? That guy has a fervent.
They have that fervent is really deadly. It's like a 0.5 second cast or something.
That's the
Like,
only one that's like
or
really
something.
bad.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think that it is a fine ability to give to a mob when they want you to not kite that pull, but I feel like they just put it on a lot of pulls because in general they don't like kiting being an option, and they don't like it when people pull a lot and kite. But like the problem is that fervent strikes don't preclude that gameplay. It just means you have to do that gameplay without melee in your group, right? And that's I don't know. I mean,
well, there's 2 big glaring issues with it that I haven't mentioned yet too. One is that it only punishes people in melee. So if you have a group of full range, you just avoid the entire problem of this entirely, and it literally just only punishes a certain portion of the player base. The second thing is there's things in the game that require you to kite and cause your
Affixes
DPS to
as
get
well,
fermented
right?
at the same time. Yeah, necrotic plus fervent strikes is really stupid. Not every DPS has a way to completely parry a fervent strike or ever be aware of it in the first place unless they have a weak aura or something that's telling them it's coming.
I actually think that what you said about some like high priority mobs like mini bosses and stuff like that having a fervent strike is totally fine because you should only be tanking that mob by itself. I think that is a very fair take. And so they should probably be using it more sparingly, less on trash packs, more on like it could be on like a mini boss or something, right?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Like bosses, obviously. Make sure you don't have to. Make sure bosses actually require you to stay in melee, so you can't just kite a boss around or something. I don't know.
yeah, that's fair. Let's talk a little bit about linearity of dungeons, or I guess layout of dungeons, because that was a thing Tettles mentioned earlier. This expansion, most dungeons are pretty linear or very linear, right? You have dungeons like Theater, the 3-wing dungeon, Halls of Atonement, open at the start, then goes into a linear spot. But most dungeons are you kill boss 1, you kill boss 2, you kill boss 3, and you kill boss 4, right? And you kill them in a straight line, which is not how dungeons always are or have to be, right? Like there are about half the dungeons in BFA. There's like stuff like Freehold, Ataldazar, where you have these options about which direction you're going to go in the dungeon.
I do think that they did something pretty good with this expansion where they made sure that like whenever you hold W through the dungeon, you just have 100% count. And you're not going to be up to like
180.
I don't know. Yeah,
you remember
mother low levels of
Temple of
stupid.
Citralis as well. If you held W in that dungeon and you didn't do like the skip after the first boss and that kind of stuff, you would get to 140 or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like
I think that
145.
I think they've done a really good job this expansion of noticing that was an issue for their linear dungeons. At the same time, I just want less linear dungeons as a whole. I think that they're probably pretty easy for people who are just for the first time getting into Mythic Plus. But I feel like the replayability from season in and season out with linear dungeons is just a lot lower.
I feel like they just went too extreme with this expansion. I think they really did focus on getting that 100% trash straight line route, but they didn't. They just streamlined that and they didn't provide other options. Like in Legion, you could do that kind of and get 100, 120% maybe sometimes, but then you had like 200% other trash that you could pull as a choice instead. In most of the dungeons, at least, and there was just a balance. You had way more freedom. You had more routes you could practice and attempt before actually deciding on the best route.
And to be clear, I think that linear dungeons are good to have sometimes. I think that if half the dungeons were linear and half of them were very wide open, it would make for a lot better of an experience because you're getting different flavors of like what types of key you're looking for. But right now we just have different flavors of linear dungeons, which all kind of feel the same.
Let's talk a little bit about how Fortified and Tyrannical have felt over the years. Back in Legion, the first time around, I remember liking Tyrannical more than Fortified when I was first starting to play in Legion, but at that time I was an extremely casual Mythic Blesser, right? I was doing like and that was back when Tyrannical or Fortified would get added at level 10. That was the big mechanic you would get then. You didn't have it in the lower keys. And yeah, I mean, I remember feeling at the start of that expansion like the Tyran weeks were easier, but I think for push keys all season, Tyran was the much lower gatekeeper, right? Because it was like the bosses will one-shot you much lower.
Yeah, I mean that whole entire expansion was pretty cursed with how many one-shots there were. It was really bad. Like, if we got sent back, there would be a lot of complaining about one-shots, and I didn't like it. At the same time, you had a lot more tools to play around the one-shots with gear swapping, wearing literal fucking multiple tank trinkets.
Yeah.
I, as a DPS, would occasionally wear both Ishkar's Fell Shield Emitter and Titan Guard at the same time, which, you know...
A healer trinket and a tank trinket.
Not exactly what you're looking for, because Tyrannical and bosses were pretty bad. At the same time, I don't like Tyrannical because I think that 2.5 to 3 minute bosses don't really have a place for dungeons. I think that like the trash should be the focal point of dungeons more often than not. This is obviously just my opinion, but I think that the trash should be the focal point of dungeons more often than not. And like the routing and the pathing and stuff like that is the important part. And the dungeons or the bosses like should be there, but they shouldn't be 2.5 to 3 minutes of like 3 mechanics.
Yeah, that's the thing is almost every dungeon boss is a one-phase fight, right? And it's like you get into the boss and it's just like you know, after 3 minutes you're just like, man, what am I doing here, right? Some bosses,
multi-phase bosses are bad too. Like they're just not fun either.
Well, yeah, in M plus they're definitely a little weird. I don't know. I mean, I've liked some bosses on Tyran. At least some bosses are like brutally hard but fun on Tyran, like Mechanist's Garden in Mechagon.
Holy fuck!
That thing on Tyran was so hard, but also it's hard in a fun way. The problem was it was like after 4 minutes of it, you were like, okay, this is enough of that. But still, then some bosses are just like, you know, health sponges on Tyran. You're just like hitting it, and you're like, when is this going to be over?
No boss is worth like a 3 minute fight on Tyran. Like 2.5, 3 minutes. Once you start getting over 2 minutes on a boss in a dungeon, I feel like you're missing the mark. I think like the 1 to 1.5 minute boss fights in dungeons are about the range that you should be looking at.
I agree with that. Yeah, once you get over 3 minutes, you're just like, oh, okay, let's go to the next pull, please.
Because the trash is the fun part of the dungeon, right? The trash and the pathing are at least for me, that's the interesting stuff because you're a lot more flexible with what you can do, whereas the bosses just feel like like you said, like a health sponge, like a time sink.
Yeah.
Yeah, some bosses have fun mechanics that remain fun after having done the boss 40 times, but most don't hold up to that, right? Most bosses are like you pull Devos or whatever, and it's just like, okay, you know, this is extremely scripted, right? It's not hard.
Oh yeah,
there are some that I like. Yeah,
I had a 4.5 minute Devos fight the other day, and that was such a brutally long encounter because we didn't have Lust, we didn't have CDs really starting out because of the Last Angel.
You know, one of the bosses that I actually do think that's over 3 minutes long is Margrave Stradama, the last boss of Plaguefall. I actually think
that's a two-phase fight. That's a two-phase fight.
Yeah. I do think that boss is well done for what it is, but most of the two-phase bosses are just bad. Like, think about Vic Goth and shit, and you're like, okay, get me out of here. I don't want any of these. Vic Goth was the last boss of Borealis.
Yeah, okay, well that's not like three different... That's not like a boss fight that gains different mechanics as the fight goes on. That's just a boss fight that's like, oh, you're on one platform. Oh, would you like to go do the exact same thing on another platform? But wait, there's more.
Well, I mean, even the third boss of King's Rest.
Yeah,
with the bosses.
I
thought
that boss was
bad.
miserable because it was a 7-minute fight, but I think that, you know, that actually having like different phases can be done well, and I think that's something they could explore more in M+, is like actually phased bosses in a way that like the problem with most phase bosses is like, oh, this is a mechanic that's like going to multiplicatively increase the length of the fight as the health goes up, or it's going to like, this phase is just going to kill you or whatever, or something like that. But I think Margaret Strama is a good example of like, hey, you can actually make it so that at 50% the boss does this, and like it's now scarier for the rest of the fight. Like I think that can work well.
Imagine if they made Margrave Stradama a time-based fight. So
Yeah, exactly. That's
the higher key you went.
right. If it was like
more
after
missions
30
you had to do.
seconds, it enters phase 2 or something. Like that would be much worse.
That would have been
for sure.
terrible. And that's
Pain.
exactly how like the second boss of Siege of Borealis was. They at least learned some things from that instance.
Yeah. Yeah, that was see if you're thinking like second boss Siege is an example of like a multi-phase boss, that kind of thing is like where it just does an intermission every 30 seconds. Ugh. Get me out.
Yeah, I do think that the bosses as a whole are a little bit better than BFA, but at the same time they're just too long in my opinion. On Tyrannical specifically, I think on Fortified they're normally like okay.
One thing that has been very different this expansion, even compared to last expansion, but especially compared back to Legion, is the frequent. Excuse me. The frequent small. It's so early, man. It's almost 5, man. It's so early. Okay, the frequent small tuning to the dungeons has been a feature of Shadowlands that I have been very happy to see. And I think that this is really good. For example, what we just talked about at the start of the show today, but all throughout 9.0, 9.0.5, there would just be, I remember for like 5 weeks in a row in 9.0, when there was a lot of stuff that was bad about M+, every week they would take a chunk out of it with some good targeted nerfs to different parts.
Great. That's honestly
Yeah,
just
they're
exceptional. They've been doing a good job of being aggressive with the tuning and that element of it.
So I'm definitely hopeful that they continue that next expansion or wherever. I think that's always really good to see. The next thing to, I guess, talk a little bit about is rewards. Dungeon rewards have been another thing that I think they've been putting a lot of work into this expansion. Obviously, Valor was introduced mid-patch as a reaction to complaints about how bad M+ gearing was. And it does kind of beg the question of like, what should M+ gearing look like? How has it looked in the past? And what would we like it to look like in the future?
I actually really like how Valor works right now. Personally, I feel rewarded that I do 10 keys each week, and I can upgrade a piece to 246 in raid. I think I'm still one of the higher eye level people in my raid group, even though I don't PvP. Which is good. I think the PvPers that don't do Mythic Plus in my raid group are also about the same spot I am, so it's working out pretty well this season.
I think you should be able to upgrade to 252, but I think that I don't think it should be as streamlined as people would like it to be. I think that if it was like, yeah, there's exponential Valor costs to upgrade at like level, right? And I think that the 252 one could it could be good to have, but it could also be pretty expensive to where you're not going to end up wearing 6 pieces of Mythic Plus loot kind of thing.
Yeah, I have a couple ideas on this one. First is to add like a trophy to your Great Vault that you can get that lets you take an item from 246 to 252.
I wouldn't hate that. I would not hate that.
And that just shows up in your vault maybe a third of the, maybe it's got like a 20% chance to show up in any M+ vault slot you get. And that I think that could be a way to let you get to that 252 level. I think another thing to consider is what if they just did the thing they did for PvP gearing where the items are better in dungeons? I think that has a big problem of it's like, oh, gear sets, right? Like, oh, I need a gear set for M+ that's different than my raid gear set. And historically that's been the way that I've dismissed this suggestion. But seeing how it works in PvP, I'm kind of thinking that maybe the upsides of this are worth that downside. That is a real downside of like, it would be annoying to switch between my 252 bracers and my M+ bracers that are 259 and M+ or whatever.
Yeah.
The upside of like, hey, if you gear your character through M+, your character will have this M+ gear without it actually taking away from the fact that the raid gear is the best for the raid and the PvP gear is the best for PvP. Like, I think that might be the best balance of things, even factoring in that is a very real downside that would come with it, is that you'd have all these gear sets to manage.
I think that trophy idea is actually excellent.
I like both ideas. Yeah, the trophy thing would be great for targeting RNG items that you'd have to farm from, like people doing 50 theaters of pain to get the ruby at THD lock. They could use the trophy instead to upgrade their ruby eventually when they get it, instead of
Ooh.
relying on getting one from the vault.
Okay, yeah, I don't think you should be able to upgrade one from previous seasons. I think that was bad design.
Right, yeah, you
Yeah.
should still have to actually drop one from current M plus. Speaking of
But
which,
let's say THD finally got that ruby after his 50th run, and then drops a 252 ruby out of his vault the next day. I mean, and there's no counterplay that you take the ruby, because that's like your only chance you get of the whole season to get it, probably.
yeah, well, I
And
mean, you
then
do the same with the trophy, right? Is you trophy the ruby and it'd be the same outcome.
Yeah, yeah. So the trophy would help in that regard. And then second, I think the gear sets for Mythic Plus would be cool. They don't seem to want to bring back gear swapping Mythic Plus like in Legion, and having just 3 other gear sets of your specs, or 4 if you play Druid, whatever, for Mythic Plus only, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world compared to like 11 sets for swapping legendaries.
Yeah, I'm also. I mean, I'm kind of. I think gearing is in a good spot right now for M plus. This is the thing. Like these are suggestions and stuff, but I think that right now the way that Valor's working, if they didn't change M plus gearing, I wouldn't have a problem with it. Whereas I would have in 9.0, right at the start of 9.0, I would have been like, this is bad.
Yeah,
This is,
I think
not
I think
ideal.
right now it's not terrible.
Yeah. One kind of complaint that I have about M plus and seasonal gearing in general is the patch by patch experience of like, oh, this patch I
On
have
the same gear.
a 226 IQD. The next patch comes out, can't wait to get my 246 IQD, and then eventually a 252 IQD out of my box. Oh, it's next patch. Time for me to get my 276 IQD, and or 272 IQD or whatever. It's just like, oh man, what?
Okay. So what's the solution? Is it seasonal gearing for Mythic Plus, or is it make the raid gearing tangibly better than Mythic Plus gearing?
I think that seasonal trinkets from M Plus would be a cool way to go about it. They introduced new PvP trinkets, but what if M Plus just had like, some prideful trinkets, and then some tormented trinkets, and then some whatever the next affixes themed trinkets are, and like those are the trinkets that you get from dungeons, and they change this in season.
So you wouldn't have them drop. Okay, interesting.
I don't know. I think that it's been a downside of this expansion is that you have expansion long trinkets rather than patch based trinkets, right? Like if you go back to like, WoD, it's like, oh, this trinket was the what is it, soul fragment thing tier, right?
Soul capacitor?
Soul capacitor, yeah.
Oh,
yeah. This tier was the tier where you had the Reforger trinket or whatever from Throne of Thunder or something. It's just like here it's like, oh, this I'm playing Spyglass loaded dice for the 3rd patch in a row at the end of BFA, right? And just like, man.
Yeah, Rune of Reorigination is
Rune of
what the name of that
Reorigination
one
was
was.
the one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's minor nitpick, but
I think that that's, yeah, I definitely do think that's minor nitpicking. I don't know if it's necessary. I think it would be cool, but I don't think it's like something that necessarily needs to have a lot of dev time involved in.
yeah, that's the thing. Is like
something.
got
I was gonna say something we glossed over though is like impact of affixes as a whole. Do you
sure.
do you like where affixes currently stand with like how much you're playing the dungeon instead of the affixes versus how much you're playing the affixes instead of the dungeon kind of thing?
I think that the good affixes are the ones that are the less impactful ones that let you do the dungeon more and the affix less.
Okay.
So like I think that the nerfs they did to storming were good ones. I think that reducing the impact of affixes like necrotic and bolstering would be good ways forward. I think affixes like raging, explosive are in good spots right now. Like I think that this week is actually, like it's a hard week, but the things about the dungeon that are hard are at least based on what the dungeon is doing to you, enhanced by the affixes, rather than just like what the affixes are doing to you by themselves, which I think is a good place for them to land.
How do you feel about seasonal affixes? I think that Prideful is probably, like, personal opinion, I think that Prideful is probably too intrusive, and I think Tormented's a lot better. Trell, what do you think?
Yeah, Prideful is way too intrusive. I think it wasn't tuned properly, and that once you got to like 20, you were so pigeonholed into a certain comp just to be able to kill the prides in a meaningful fashion, and then have CDs going to the next pull still, and it like limited the pulls you could do in a dungeon because of percent as well. Tormented is like a whole new world for especially being the first season of an X pack where you can pull freely and not worry about meeting certain thresholds. It is so nice compared to Prideful.
Yeah,
And I do feel like it's very minimally impacting the dungeon.
the 20% bars, it's weird because like I felt like with Reaping it wasn't as big of a deal, but I think that was just because like you could theoretically get like a 40% Reaping on one pull or the next pull and it wouldn't really matter, right? Like you could do either one. But with Pride, it's like, oh, if you do not Pride before Hakar, like what are you doing, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's I think Prideful had a lot of nice stuff about it, but it definitely I'm glad it's gone. I think that I think it's nice to be on a new seasonal affix, and I think it would be better if they, tried to not do an affix that does all of those things that Pride did, the way that it impacted your, the experience of fighting Prides and high keys, but also the experience of like your route being just hard locked to these 20% breakpoints.
Season 1 felt like Prideful the dungeon.
Yeah, especially in high keys. This thing is like it didn't really feel that way in 15s and stuff, right? Like it.
Yeah.
But as you started getting higher than 15, it really Pride took over real fast.
Yeah.
Not even just killing Pride and using Pride at the right spots. You also were required to skip Pride a lot, which is in itself a really annoying thing to do with a new group that you're putting together.
Especially because
Like,
they tried to nerf that like 7 times and they could never stop us. They could never stop us from skipping Prides. I don't know. Like they should have Pride should have just teleported to the last boss, man. That's what they should have done.
I really do like seasonal fixes though, and I think the direction that they're going with them is a lot better. Where it's the kiss curse kind of thing. It's you're actually having to spend some time on the seasonal fix, but you are getting a gain out of it at the end of the day. And I do think that the direction generally is pretty good.
Yeah, I think Tormented is landing in that like B+, A- spot already. And I think it could be pretty easily better than that as well if there weren't these like the Frost guys anima powers. What are those? Like why?
They're terrible.
Why,
They're all fucking bad.
it feels so bad to just click that orb and you're like, oh right, you don't actually get a power from this guy. I was excited about clicking this orb for a sec, but no, it's
not about the relative power of the powers. It's just the design of them is so bad because like. From Executioner, you get either the Necrotic Dagger Dot, which is a lot of single target damage, or you get the Volcanic Plume, which is like not an insignificant amount of CC, or you get Champion's Brand, which is like pretty good stats. And it's like that mob's powers are not bad for DPS, and you actually have a real choice, whereas the rest of them are not good.
I can't even remember the third tank choice on the Frost guy, and I've done a bunch of keys already this season. It's so bad.
Dude, Bert is wilding out in the background. He got like right into frame, and he like stretched, and now he's rolling around.
Anyways, I like Volcanic Plume though.
Sorry. Dude, it's so distracting. Yeah, I agree though. I think the decision between Volcanic Plume and Necrotic Dagger is a good one. And I wish they all had something interesting. Doesn't have to be powerful, but interesting.
Exactly.
In the picks, and I think the Frost guy in particular really falls short there.
I do think that Tormented is like again another step in the right direction. They're constantly moving away from Infested and Beguiling and more toward like this is Beguiling except just made better. This is Beguiling except you get things out of it.
All right, we are running out of time, but real quick, let's do a couple more of the stuff that has changed. I think the big thing that we haven't talked much about because we didn't want to just be complaining for an hour, the AoE cap. We've all talked about the AoE cap before. All three of us are huge anti-AoE cap activists and very, very hopeful that they will reconsider it going forward. I don't like what it does to the metagame. I don't like how it plays in dungeons when you are target capped or when you have people that are target capped in your group. And I think that was a big part of BFA and of Legion that was dramatically better than current M+.
Yep.
But I don't want to focus too much about it. Trell.
It's a good summer.
Covenant dungeon buffs. I know this is a little flag that you like to carry, and obviously it'll be gone next expansion as well, but I think another thing that's just kind of needlessly restrictive, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a pretty fun group I've been playing with the last few weeks, and we don't have a Venthyr, so we just avoid every Halls and Sanguine Depths key that we see and re-roll them because doing Halls and Sanguine Depths without Venthyr is like the most least fun thing ever. Like the Lantern pulls are very fun. You want to save those keys for having a Venthyr in the group. Halls routes you have to completely change if you don't have one Venthyr, so you avoid all the Stoneborns because you want to not pull them, obviously. they're not great for count and they hurt really bad.
You know what's funny? The meta for Stoneborns now is triple Stoneborn into Halkias.
Yeah.
It's so silly.
I kind of like taking one into each shard and then one for the pack, like a big pull in front of Halkias, and then one for Halkias. But
You play
one on the right,
into the bottom, one on the right, and one into the bottom shard, and then you get the one that's like top left ledge back, and then like far right side,
Yeah,
and then you take all
Halkias.
3 of those.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different stuff that works for that. Okay, and then class balance in general, I would say reasonably good this expansion so far. You know, things have been a little fire magey for a bit in keys, but I think they're doing a little bit of a better job than like BFA. Like, do you remember the state of some specs in BFA was pretty bad the whole time through, and also the best specs like the Prot Warrior seasons were pretty oppressive.
For a very long time, the delta between like AoE damage from like top to bottom was absolutely massive. In this expansion, it feels like it's a lot closer. It's not great. Like there's still some stuff that you just
and it's largely the target cap that is the culprit in a lot of the
it was Half-Lock in season 1.
Yeah.
Half-Lock was just unplayable in season 1.
True.
And then finally, incoming damage on tanks. This kind of goes back to the point of the rapid pace of changes, because this is something they've iterated on like 40 times now, this expansion, and I think it's finally in a good spot. But for 9.0 and even in 9.0.5, wow, you were getting clobbered on a tank in keys. It was rough.
Yeah.
Yeah, it started off way too high. I just hope they learn their lesson and don't do that again. I think they really intentionally made it that high, wanting tanks to just get destroyed. But that plus the Demon Hunter bug where they had double demonic wards and were immune to magic damage was making it such a huge disparity in tank classes being able to do keys. It was just wild.
It's weird because like Sire Denathrius autos so hard on progression. Sire Denathrius hits so hard, and that is so fun. But like when white mobs and M+ are doing that, when white swings are doing that, are hitting that hard in M+, that is the opposite. It's so weird. I wish they made more raid bosses that hit as hard as Sire, but less trash that hits as hard as Season 1 trash did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's all relative, right? It just needs to be tuned in a way where you can do a weekly 15 and not feel like you're fighting 4 Sire Denathriuses when you're just fighting 4 Groundskeepers and Halls of Atonement, you know?
Yeah.
Something that I want to say before we go on, and we pretty much end the show pretty quickly. One of the things that I was talking about on stream the other day was a dungeon score and like how they should implement stuff moving forward. And one of the things that I thought is that they should give better prestigious rewards to it. And something that Evade brought up is the fact that if they add more prestigious rewards to it, it would be good for you to have like things that you work for, whether that be like transmog mounts and stuff like that. But at the same time, you're like the player base would also like be less inclined to do dungeons with friends and more inclined to take it a lot more serious. We didn't have enough time to really explore this thought, but I did want to pitch it a little bit just at the end, so that there is something to think about in that regard. I don't know what the actual solution is, because I do think he's onto something where if you add prestigious rewards, very similar to how PvP works, then you do lose something about wanting to play with your friends as opposed to just playing with the same 5 stack every day, right?
It's true, yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's probably some clever ways they could, try and I think it would be cool if there were rewards that like what if there was another score that just added the points you got from every dungeon all together, right? So like, hey, you do a Halls 15 and you get 150 points, and you do a Halls 12, you get another 120 points or whatever, and just like when you get to 10,000 of that score, you get a mount. And it's like, it's like one of those PvP mounts that you just get for playing a lot of PvP. It's not one of the ones that you get for actually being sick, right? Like those exist too and should exist in M+, but I think there could be more stuff that just like, hey, have you done 100 dungeons this season? Here is your mount. And you did 50 high keys? Okay, you get it as well. You get it faster. I think that could be a way that they could add some cool new rewards to M+ that aren't like gated behind super high content. I do think that like dungeon teleports at 20 are great. I think that's cool.
Yeah.
I love those. Those are awesome.
Yeah. All right. So that's a little bit of our overview of just, I guess, some dungeon stuff in general. We've got some cool new stuff coming out next week, but we will now move on to our thanking the patrons and our Q&A bit. So, our patrons: Paul of US Tichondrius, Kumcubine of US Tichondrius, Oh No, I'm a Cat Girl Again, Titanforge memes are the best memes, Ja, Dratnus' Dino Pillow, Chromed, Trekkie, Never Nude, Chewy, Renowned 40 in Storyline, and Flawless every Layer 12 in Torghast. Did I just beat 9.1?
Did you say 40?
That's a 6.
We're around 60, sorry. 9.0 brain. I guess it means acronyms for Final Fantasy soon. Another boss with one-shots, but this is the one you saved your B-reses for. That was your bit from the video, yeah.
Yeah, that was such a dumb line. I was like, there's another boss with one shots me this time. You saved your B-reses for him.
It's not AMZ, it's AMZ. Salty Senny, Necris, Tankdill, Nevuk, Sinmora, Eevee, Slappy Hands on Dormzane gives me purpose. Stevenson, love the Constantinople bit. Take Light of the Protector and Frenzied Regen off the GCD. No Trick, I scheduled a Tettle's Flame. Sir Maticus now resides on US Zul'jin. Dymat, Tettles, or Trell, would you like to read this one? I know this is a language you speak.
Oh boy, this is a hard language. I've spent some time trying to figure this one out. Let's see. Wait time is fun for all my friends. Ooh woo, we killed the AOTC boss in Luton Scoot Thrall Hold Side.
Holy shit, that's Thrall! That was like, what is that word?
It's literally in our thing as THWAWW. Lufer, old
Please
man,
stop this.
relives his glory days. Tune into M Plus Historian for more info. At Tettles, can you run your fingers through your hair and flip it the Tettles way?
The Tettle's way.
Gallic, Brusif, Dratnos Abyss, Dooming and Glooming, M Sanity, Xena, We Are Praying Hanny will pump in 9.1. Rogue is now good enough for Prague, still bad enough to be sat for SLG, bless up. Red Color, youtube.com/workbringer, Walking Atlas, a horror of US Proudmore, KZA's Mythic Team is Trash Cans and Not Trash Cans, Snicker Shelby, Alphabet Soup, Druid Friends of Evolved Gaming, Roly Poly, number one Simsky for Trelsky, Indeterminate Clop DPS, Lolari, 3-time KS Monster Chlorix, HOA routes or Biss, unless Lurka butt pulls. KS Monster, I like that.
KS Monster.
Yeah.
What a good one.
All right, let's move on to Q&A. Our first question.
Q&A.
Our first question comes from Der Tiki Man, who asks, I'd like affixes that actually teach people to play their spec better. Like with Legion Overflowing, that teach you it's okay to leave your DPS around 90% health. Something like Explosives that needs to be interrupted, or else it's damage done decrease for DPS. And Tank something with positioning but not nasty Sanguine healing. I think there's a couple things to break down here. First off, I think the problem with Overflowing was more than just like some healers. You're just sitting there with as like a holy priest or a holy paladin, and you're just like, oh, I have a button that heals somebody for 300% of their health bar that I like cannot press this week. I think that whereas like rest of you is just like you just hot everybody, doesn't matter, right? Because it overheals a little bit and then it immediately clears the overheal.
I could think of some like really maybe awful but also good things at the same time. Like, what if there's an affix that punish healers for leaving DPS at lower than 70% health for longer than like 5 seconds?
Grievous? Any Grievuses?
Well, yeah, I mean, Grievous. Fuck, that already exists, huh?
I think that the idea of an affix that like if you do it bad, it doesn't kill you, but it reduces your damage done. I think that's a cool one for DPS players because like a lot of DPS players I know, they don't really care if they die, but they do care if they do 5% less damage. So that could get through to the DPS
necrotic,
brains.
but for DPS.
Yeah.
Also the one where like if you get hit from behind as a tank, it like slows you by 70%. I think that would actually be really good for teaching tanks how to never get hit from behind. Because I see a lot of tank players and there's just like one mob sitting barely behind their model, just trucking them from behind. They don't notice a lot of times. I'm just like, please move it in front of you. But that would also be easily solved, so probably not a good affix.
Yeah.
What do you think about the concept of affixes that teaches people to play their spec better?
Their spec better? Oh yeah. I mean, they're just ones that are like I think the idea of like something that teaches you to. The thing about interrupts though is you can't. Nobody has free interrupts in dungeons, right? Like there are so many pulls where you just are using your interrupts. It's like an affix that required interrupts would be kind of rough.
What if you just got rewarded for interrupting?
Yeah.
Then you'd have people fighting for interrupts as opposed to like
True.
being okay with the rotation. I don't know.
I'm not sure. I think that it's a cool idea though. Our next question comes from 888joy888 in Discord who asks, thinking as a whole raid team in early to mid mythic progression now, what is your view on domination shard sets? While the unholy set certainly seems to remain the best absolute set for pure DPS for some classes, it is also very one-dimensional. Yes, I think that blood is the premium gamer set for progression at this point, because it just does so much HPS to yourself that I think that will... The fact even it does a little bit less than unholy, doesn't scale into AoE and stuff, but on hard fights, that 1,000 HPS on yourself is so good. So I would, if I was into mythic progression right now, I'd be doing blood on most specs, unless you're a spec that scales insane off frost, in which case do that. But I don't think I would play unholy on anything.
If you wear the blood set and you wear the frost shard of cure for the absorb, you're just immortal. I think.
Can't die. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that it's
like Tuttles, you're probably playing unholy right now, but that's because you upgraded it already. If you got your embers back,
unholy's still like 2 to 3% damage ahead of blood.
I don't know, man. 1,000 HPS, dude. Unholy, I guess for Moonkin in particular is like you got a Chaos Bane during your ramp. It's so much damn, right?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it'd still be good to swap if I could. I like playing. I like playing Kier. Is that the Pride Ash
Yeah.
shield? Whatever.
Kier's
I like
Pride
playing
Ash.
that. Yeah. I like playing that over the blood damage shard.
Yeah, on Sylve for sure.
Well, on Sylve definitely, yeah. But in general, I also like it. I don't know.
Even on other fights, I think my guild started doing that on Paintsmith onward. We just like don't use the 5th DPS shard. Always use Kier if you have the option.
Kier is really, really, really good. That's for sure. Nice thing about Frost is you get Kier as part of that, so you could play triple Frost, double damage, and still earn triple damage and still have Kier. So that is an upside to that set.
True.
All right, that will do it for our show this week. We will be back next week with some cool stuff. Maybe. I don't know. I've been hinting there's been cool stuff coming for a while, but it hasn't happened on our next show.
It keeps getting pushed back, okay?
But for sure, next week for sure.
This time for sure.
That will be all for this week, though. Thanks for hanging out, everybody. Later.
Bye.
Bye.